Hello and welcome to SIY Sew It Yourself. We're back with another video tutorial and pattern for you guys to follow along with. And this one is a grocery tote and storage case. The entire grocery tote fits in here. And the case is so cute and it's so tiny and it'll just fit inside your purse if you're planning on going shopping later. So we're going to learn so much in this tutorial, but let's take a peek at the project first before we get to it. So it folds up super nice in this case. So when you're shopping, you can just slide your little case in here along with whatever else you need. It's a really big bag. You can fit a ton in this. So this is great if you're going to the farmer's market or the supermarket or just out, maybe not to Target. We all tend to spend a little too much at Target, but it is really fun. You have the opportunity to use not one, not two, not 3 or 4, but 5 different fabrics when you include the lining in here. So here's what we're going to learn in today's video tutorial. We're going to learn how to fussy cut. We're going to learn how to work with patterns, especially ones you printed off the internet. We're going to learn how to sew smooth curves. We're going to learn how to top stitch. We're going to learn how to make darts. We're going to learn how to box stitch the corner so we get a nice, lovely shape to our bag. We're going to talk about turning skinny ties and inserting a lining. So it's a ton to learn and it is really fun to challenge yourself to do something fun and fast. You can absolutely get this together in an afternoon if you're a confident sewer, or a weekend if you're a true beginner and you are working on this for the first time. This video tutorial takes you through everything step by step, from cutting everything out to getting our pattern together. Every single thing that we're just listed off, we're going to go over it in detail from 3 different camera angles so you know exactly what you're supposed to do. This pattern is available through SIY retailers, which you can find one near you at SIYSewItYourself.com. If you don't see a quilt shop near you that's participating, there are also online retailers as well that you can get it from. We have some lovely kits that have been put together by Jaftex, which is sponsoring this, and Jaftex family of fabric includes FreeSpirit, Henry Glass, Studio E, and Blank. Their mission with the SIY program is to make sure that you guys have everything you need to be inspired to sew and to know how to do it. So that way you can get the confidence and the just good feelings overall that come from making things yourself. This fruit-themed grocery tote is from Blank, and that is one of the Jaftex family of fabrics, and it is so cute. We got some pineapples, we have some fruit wreaths, we have a nice border print of fruits, some bananas, of course you can't have fruit without bananas, and then a nice citrusy print for the lining. So cute, so fun. Next we have a kit from Henry Glass. This one reminds me of Civil War reproductions. It is going to be great for anybody who enjoys like country kitchen. The fabrics are just very rich in that colorway. They're really fun to put together, very Americana, I think. So we have some really fun prints for this one. In this one, we have multiple prints. We have a different print for our pocket, and then we also have prints on the back. So this one actually has 6 different prints that we're going to utilize, and then a nice light lining so you can find that little tiny thing that you have lost. The case for that one is going to have this fun Star Americana print. We cut ours on the bias, so that way it was kind of fun, got a little diagonal in there. And then we've got that light print on the inside. Next we have fabric from Studio E. They always have such sweet prints, and I love the pastel colorways that they come up with. This one again has 6 different prints. You get 3 for the front, 2 for the back, and then a really nice light lining, again so you can see everything that you need to see. And the cover for this one is also this really cute pink pastel. We got some nice florals on the outside and then just a sweet pink on the inside. And last but not least, we have an Anna Maria Horner print from FreeSpirit Fabrics. I love this one. Anna Maria always comes up with the biggest scale print, and it just looks fabulous in this big scale. And they did such a good job fussy cutting to see that rose and the butterfly in there. This one also has 6 prints, so we have got all of our pieces on the front. We got 3 plus 2 more on the back. This one's very boho chic, nice light lining so you can see where everything is, and then the outside matches the big floral print here. So this is a really fun one. It's gonna be really pretty wrapping up that tote. Well, no matter which kit you pick, you cannot go wrong. There's a style for almost everybody in your life that they put together, and they're all fabulous. All right, let's get in the tutorial and learn how to make this amazing grocery tote that you'll be using all the time. So to get started, you're going to need your pattern, which is available through any participating SIY retailer. To find one near you, go to SIYSewItYourself.com. And if you don't have one that's close to you, there are online retailers as well that you can contact to get your pattern. So you're going to have your pattern, which has all your instructions, and then you also have your templates. You're going to want to make sure that when you print your templates, you're printing it at 100% because we want everything to be sized correctly. Now, if you're new to the world of printable patterns, what you're going to do is we're going to cut these out and tape them together. And that is going to form our template for our shopping bag. So what I like to do is leave sections so that way I have something underneath to tape to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the bottom of my part 3 to go on top of my part 4, and also the bottom of my part 2, which will go on top of my part 3. And I'm going to leave a little bit below part 1, which is our handle that will eventually go up top. So I'm going to start cutting all that out, then we're going to tape it together. You can absolutely use a dull blade that needs to get changed on your rotary cutter and use that for this process, or just use paper scissors. I'm going to be totally honest, I often cut paper with my fabric scissors, but today we're going to use separate scissors. All right, so I've got everything cut out. Some patterns will have like a 1-inch grid where you can check to make sure everything is all right. In this one, it has this red part that says, confirm your printer output is accurate. This bar should be exactly 6 inches long. So what you can do is you can take your ruler and you can put it on top, and mine is exactly 6 inches long. So I know that I am at 100% and I can go ahead and continue on. All right, so now we have to assemble our pieces. What I've done is I've left a little bit above everything, and I'm going to line everything up. So that way all of you can see that there's 3 marks here to line up, and the next one will have 2, and then the final one will have 1. I like to use packing tape for this because I always have it handy, and it's very sturdy, but Scotch tape or anything clear will work. I like to pull my piece so it's a little bit longer than the paper itself, and then what I do is I tape it to the piece that's going to be on top, and then I kind of pull the tape away. And I just work to line it up as best I can. All right, that's pretty close. So now I can go ahead and place that down, and I'm just going to wrap this extra tape around to the back side. If it's a pattern you think you're going to make again and again, I would also tape along the back. So it's just a little bit sturdier. They also make what's called pattern tracing cloth. It's like a not woven, but it is a thicker material that you can use to transfer all your pattern markings to. That way it's not as flimsy and it certainly won't tear. All right, so now we're going to attach 2 to 3. And again, we've got our 2 marks here to guide us. All right, now we've got our final piece. We're going to attach our 1 to our 1. All right, we've got our pattern piece for our bag together. Now I get to do the same thing with the pocket. So when you're all done, you should have your piece for your main shopping bag. You should have a part for your pocket, and then you should have a part for the case. This kind of looks like a clover. You're going to print off 4 of these, and then you're going to tape them all together to get your template. All right, so we're going to talk about cutting out our pattern pieces here. The instructions give you enough fabric requirements to make 2 of these, because let's be honest, when have you ever gone to the grocery store and left with things that will only fit in 1 bag? Doesn't happen very often. So what you want to do is make sure that you are flipping this the correct way. So for example, if we're going to be following the example here, you can see that the handle is going up and to the left with a curve on the right. So if we were putting it on this fabric, we would put it with the face up. But this one it's going the other direction. So if I just cut all my pieces with it going face up, I would only have pieces for the right side of my bag, and that would not work. So what we're gonna do to cut the pieces on the left side is we're gonna flip it over. So what I'm gonna do is just lay everything out like this, and you wanna kind of get it as straight with the grain as you can. And I'm gonna bring it over as far as I can as well here. And we're just gonna put some pins in it. You can also use pattern weights, but I prefer pins if possible. Things move around a little bit less that way. Now that I have everything pinned down, I'm good to either cut around with my fabric scissors or rotary cutter with the mat underneath. Now we have two pieces ready to go. We have a right side, which was cut with the pattern facing up, and then we have the left side, which was cut with the pattern facing down. So make sure you have a right and a left for both the front and the back of your pocket. When you are cutting the lining, you can just leave everything folded in half and you will get a right and left at the same time. So you can kind of skip this step. It goes a little faster that way. All right, so now we're gonna talk about fussy cutting. So that way, if you want, your pocket can look like it's coming straight up onto your bag. Now, I've already cut it for the actual pocket we're gonna be using, so this is just a demo. But what you wanna do is you wanna look for the fabric repeat. So here I can see in the bottom, I've got a pineapple going kind of up and to the right, and we have one coming down, then we have one going back to the bottom left, and one coming down and one going up. So I know that this here is a repeat for this part right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to try to find the exact layout here to get it to look just right. Let's see, this needs to come over some. All right, now we have already turned this fabric into Swiss cheese, but you can see that I have lined this up really well. We've got our pocket here, and when we lay it back down, or our main piece, you can tell that we're meeting here and along my edges all the way up. So if this had been a whole piece, I could then take my pocket and I could lay it down like this, and I could just pull out this piece, pin it down, trim it out, and you're gonna end up with a fussy cut piece that looks a little something like this. All right, just look at how good that is. We've got the wreath going right in, this wreath is coming up, and this one also is passing through, and it really just butts right up next to each other the way it's supposed to. So that's the goal. If you are not completely on, just pick a fabric that isn't quite as busy like this one, and no one will ever tell that you weren't quite on with fussy cutting, so you definitely can get away with not doing it. One other tip I'm going to give you guys before you move on is the pattern tells you to cut across the seam allowance when it's time for the lining. That's because it's arranged on the fold so you don't have a seam allowance. What you can do instead is just take it and fold it over on that dotted line. And then when you want to make it again, all you have to do is unfold it and you've got your template for your outer pieces, and fold it in and you've got your template for your inner pieces. So we got a little too excited and we already cut our lining pieces, but we're going to pretend that this is one big piece of fabric. What I have here is it on the fabric fold. This is the way it comes off of the roll of fabric when you are getting it from the bolt. So we're going to take our edge that we folded over, and you're just going to line that up with that folded edge. That way when you cut it, you're going to get it being 2 widths long instead of just 1. So let me show you what that looks like. So you can see here, this is what it looks like once you take that off. And then when you unfold it, instead of having the half width like we did for the outer of the bag, we have a whole lining where basically it's in quarters for the outside and it's going to be in halves for the inside. So it's a little bit less sewing when you get to the inside. All right, so now we have to mark all of the darts so that way we have kind of a box bottom to this bag. So that is what these little diagonal marks are that are coming to a point. So what you're going to do is for the pocket and all the bottoms, you're going to lay the template back on top. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You can mark it with a removable marking tool, which is what I'm going to do here, or you can actually snip into the fabric. If you snip into the fabric, make sure you are within the seam allowance or you are going to have a tough time. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pen and I'm just going to lift up and I'm going to mark where that line is on the outside. So I've got my nice little mark there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. All right, now what you can do is you can take your pin, stick it right in the center where that dot is, and sort of push it through both the paper and your piece of fabric. All right, I pushed that pretty far through, mostly for the sake of the camera, so that way when I peel this back, everything stays in place. So I can see right here is where my pin is, so I'm going to make a big circle mark right there, so I have my alignment to go to. All right, so I've got a big circle dot right here, and then it's kind of busy fabric, and then I have my pieces here. So this tells me where I need to pin. So what I want to do is I want to take my two pink marks right here and here, and I want to line those up right on top of each other. The easiest way to do it is to physically put your pin in right on one mark and then right out on the other. And what I like to do is before I do this and pin it, I'll just leave that kind of loose for a second. I'm going to figure out where my dot is here, which is right there. And I'm going to fold that over. And I've got my pin like poking out there now. So what I can do is I can line this up and I can pin across there. And then with that pin poking out so I can see it pretty well, you can see it popping out there, I'm just going to pin across as well. So this is my indication that this is where my line stops. Now, if you are a visual person like me, what I recommend doing is marking the line you're supposed to sew. So if you just take a ruler and you line it up from where I see my pink line is right down here to where the tip of my pin is, then I can mark my dart. And now I have a very clear line of where I'm supposed to sew to create that box pleat. I'm going to do the same thing for all of my remaining bag bottom pieces now. If you're having trouble seeing your lines when you have it face down, just trace them out so that you have a nice visual. So I've got all my pleats pinned for all of my outer and all of my lining. Actually, I'm going to unpin at the pockets because that is going to be treated a little bit differently later. So we're going to set those to the side. What we're going to do here is stitch right on this line. We're going to start at the outside and run all the way to the point. Then we're going to leave a long tail so that way we can knot that rather than backstitch. So that way you don't have a pointy dart, you have one that lies nice and flat. All right, to all my quilters out there watching this, you are going to want to stitch with your needle in the center for this project. All right, so I've removed that first pin and we're just going to slowly stitch right on that line that I drew. And we're going to stitch right off of the edge. Then what you're going to do is you'll lift your needle up and give yourself a real nice long tail. And I'm just going to cut that. In this case, this is the lining, so I've got to do the other side as well. All right, so we've got our dart and we have our very long string attached. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to separate those tails. Might be a little twisted. And then you're just going to knot that by hand. Just cross them past each other. Give it a knot like you're tying a shoe. I'm going to go ahead and do a couple more times for good measure. All right, now that should be nice and secure and you won't have a nice pointy point. It'll be nice and flat. I'm going to go ahead and clip that. And you can see when we open that up, that is nice and flat. It is not a funky little point at all. All right, so you are going to repeat that process of sewing your darts and hand knotting them for the rest of the pleats for the lining and the outside pieces, not the pocket. All right, so now we're going to prepare our pocket. So you should have pieces that are going in opposite directions. I have my fussy cut pocket with a little note pinned to the front of it so I know what is the right side. What I'm going to do is layer them right sides together. And then we're going to pin along this top curve and we're going to stitch it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now a 1/2 inch seam allowance isn't a common seam allowance that you guys are going to come across. So what I'm going to do to find that is I'm going to move my needle all the way to the left as far as it'll go. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my ruler so that the 1/2 inch is right underneath where that needle width is. So I can kind of lower my pin down and I can see where that is. So right now I've got the needle right on top of where that 1/2 inch mark is. So I can either tape along this side because it's kind of in an odd spot, or I'm also going to test and see if that is maybe in a better spot because there is markings on your sewing machine as well. So we're going to test now in the 3rd position. So now if I put it right down in the center, ooh, that's going to be perfect. So your sewing machine has all these markings on it. So what I've got is I've got my needle down over the 1/2 inch dotted line on my ruler. And when I do that, the edge of my ruler hits right on the marking on my sewing machine for 5/8 of an inch. So if I lift that up and remove it, then I know that if I line everything up with this guide right here that is embedded on the throat of my sewing machine, I'll be able to sew that 1/2 inch seam. If you're having a hard time, you can always throw a little bit of painter's tape down as well to give you a nice visual guide of where the edge of your fabric should be. I am going to backstitch here when I get started, just a little bit. Now I'm just going slow as I go around this curve to make sure I keep that edge even with that 5/8 on the side. I have my hand back here. I'm not pulling on it. I'm kind of just helping guide it around as we round the sharper part of that curve. All right, now we want to clip this curve. The goal is to clip right up to, but not past where our seam allowance is. That way when we flip it over, it's going to lay nice and flat, but it is not going to pop open where we don't want it to. All right, I'm gonna give that a test, see how it goes. All right, that is looking pretty flat. I'm gonna go ahead and give this a press. If you wanted to, you could also clip these out of it to get it to separate even further. All right, so I've got my pocket pressed with the pocket fussy cut side up. So I've still got that tagged. I'm actually just gonna double check it before I go any further. I suggest you do the same. Yep, we're good. We're gonna be just fine. All right, so now we're gonna mark our miter. The difference is we're going to treat these two pocket pieces as one. All right, so I'm lining everything up as I did before. I'm gonna go ahead and mark with my pen This goes away with heat. Never had any issues with it coming back. We'll take our trusty pin, poke it through, and pull that back so we can mark our dot. I'm going to poke my pin right back through there. Let's get a more brightly colored pin so you guys can see it. There we go. Nice and yellow. All right, now we're going to take our other pin and we're going to poke through both sides of that lining right where we have made that mark. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side of the mark. Get those together. Then we're going to fold it over just like we've been doing. Go ahead and pin that one in place. And then where my pin is poking out right here, I'm going to take another pin, just go right across so I know where the top of that dart is supposed to be. Remove that one that was poking out. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark my line from where my dart ends were to where the point of it is. So I've got a nice visual when I sew. All right, still treating these two layers as one. We're just going to sew the start in. We're still leaving long tails and we're going to knot that. All right, my pocket is now complete. We're ready to attach it to the front panel of our bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line it together. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up those darts. Now I like to have them pointing in opposite directions. So I have my bottom dart pointing to the left and my top dart pointing to the right. You might not want to do that on a garment. I'm a little bit less experienced with garment sewing, but it's going to make it line nice and flat for this bag. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll get that lined up. Then we're going to line up our corners here. I'm going to throw a pin in the center just to keep everything nice and tidy. Then we're going to lie everything nice and flat and kind of work our way up this curve. Now if you want and this little tail is getting in your way, just go ahead and snip it off. All right, so now I'm going to do a basting stitch within the seam allowance. So since our seam allowance for this bag is a 1/2 inch, I'm just going to go ahead and set my sewing machine to sew a 1/4 inch stitch. If you're a quilter, you should be very familiar with that. And then it won't be visible when we sew our final bag together. So I'm starting just a little bit above where that pocket is. That way the basting stitch is going to cover as it goes over. I'm just going to go ahead and remove pins as I'm going and stitch that down. All right, so I've stitched all the way around the outside to base that pocket down. The reason why you want to do that is, especially when we're cutting out pieces from pattern paper, we're not always exactly precise the same way we are when we have a rotary cutter and a ruler. So you want to make sure that you base everything down because sometimes things don't turn out exactly the size they're supposed to. For example, my pocket front here is a little bit skinnier than my pocket lining and the lining of, or the main piece of the bag. So if I were to kind of leave that up to chance when I sew everything together, it might be hard to keep everything where it's supposed to be. Plus that's a lot of layers and things can move around on you when you're working with that. But at this point, you should have a pocket that is fully enclosed in here, and it should be fully lined and finished on the inside, so that way it's very nice and durable. All right, now we're ready to cook with gas and get this bag together. All right, so I'm going to start assembling my bags. The first thing we're going to do is sew the front seam down so that way we have 2 bag halves. I'm going to start just by pinning my front halves together. I always like to start at the corners, then work my way to the middle, and then quarter it out to make sure I've eased everything in properly as I went. All right, I'm moving my stitch back to the center so that I can sew that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, make sure to check this on your own sewing machine so you can sew this accurately. I am going to backstitch at the beginning and end of each of these straight seams. Again, I'm not really pulling the fabric here. I'm just helping make sure it stays nice and straight. All right, we're gonna give that a back stitch and move on to the next one. All right, so now what we're gonna do is set that seam and we're gonna press it so that it is underneath the left side of the panel. I'm going to do that along both sides, and then we're going to stitch within the left side of this seam allowance to top stitch it. What that's going to do is it is going to secure the seam, make sure it stays tucked underneath here, and make it a little bit stronger, which is great if you're going to be packing a lot of stuff in here. There are different feet that come with your machine or you can purchase separately that make top stitching a little bit easier. What I'm going to do is just move my stitch to a 1/4 inch stitch because then I know it will be in the seam. And then I'm going to line everything up underneath here so that the edge I'm going to be stitching under is even with the edge of my presser foot. So here we have it. It's nice and in line. And now as long as I keep this seam nice and even with the edge of my presser foot, I'll be within that and I'll be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and leave my white thread in so you guys can see it. You can also lengthen up your top stitch length as well to maybe a 3.0. If you use some decorative stitches, you can really have some fun here. All right, so now we're ready to start assembling our bag so it actually looks like a bag. We're going to make one entire half at a time. So what I have here are my lining for my back half and my front for my back half. I'm gonna go ahead and lay those down, right sides together. All right, so since we've cut this on the fold, you can see your nice little line from here that I can line up with my seam line. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pin and stitch all the way around the inner and the outer curves, but we're gonna leave the top 2 inches of our straps open so that way we can turn them by hand later and stitch that together. There is an alternate way to sew this together as well that's included in the pattern, but I'm going to show you this way because I think it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up so that it is 2 inches away from the top of that strap. And I'm just going to make a mark with my friction gel pen. It goes away with heat. Plus it's on the inside, so it's not really the end of the world. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So this is the area that I'm going to line up first. I'm going to go ahead and get my tops nice and aligned up here. Then I'm going to put pins in right on those pink lines that I marked. And that's going to be my indication to stop where I'm stitching and do a little back stitching because we want to leave these ends open. I kind of like to divide and conquer whenever I have a big seam like this to pin. So I'll pin about halfway. And then I'm also going to pin at the quarters, and we'll do that on both sides and on the outsides. All right, I'm starting with that first outside seam. I'm going to go ahead and back stitch a little bit, and I'm just going to work my way around, still using that 1/2 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure you're guiding the machine around those curves, and you may have to stop and adjust your work a little bit when you have really tight curves. All right, I'm coming up to my pin that is telling me it's time to stop here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew right up to that. I'll take my pin out and I'll do a little back stitching. All right, so at this point you want to break your thread, and now we're going to stitch down the center. Again, I'm not starting at the edge, I'm starting where my pin is because we want to leave that 2 inches free for turning. Back stitch a little here too. All right, we stopped again, 2 inches shy. Now I'm going to do my last outside curve and we're ready to turn this. All right, so at this point you should have both of your outer and your inner seams sewn, except you should have your ends free. You should have about 2 inches open at both sides. And we are doing 1/2 at a time. So if you have sewn your front half to your back half, you have done it wrong, you need to pick it out. You should be sewing one of your outside halves to one of your linings at this point, and then everything will work out just fine. Now before I turn everything, I'm going to go ahead and clip my curve so that everything lays nice and flat. When you're clipping, you want to clip on the curved part only, and you want to make sure you're getting close to the seam but not going beyond it. The tighter the curve, the closer you want your clips to be. All right, now we're going to turn everything so that it is right sides out. There are tools that make this job easier that you can get if you get really into bag making, but your fingers as well as a chopstick or a straight knitting needle, they all work just fine too. All right, so now we're going to give this a really good press. And what I like to do whenever I'm doing something where I've got lining is make sure that I am pressing from what will be the right side of the fabric. That way if it rolls a little bit, it's going to roll to the back where it doesn't matter if it's absolutely perfect or not. Now I didn't do this on my first half, but I'm going to on this one. I'm going to pre-press my strap where I'm going to sew it together in a little bit because I think it's going to be a lot easier to turn it under and get everything in place. All right, we're going to work our way around the bag, get this whole thing pressed. So now we're going to join our halves one side at a time. So what you're going to do is you're going to open them up, and in this case I'm going to just kind of pull my lining halves out of the way, and I'm going to pin together my outsides, and we're going to stitch that together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then we'll flip it around and stitch the tops together, the top seams of that handle strap for the lining as well. All right, so we have these loose lining bits. We're going to want to make sure we keep those out of the way. And we're just going to stitch right down the top of that strap with the outside first. Now this is wanting to really curl back on me, so I want to make sure that my bottom is nice and flat when I'm going across. All right, so we've got our top stitch together. Now we've got to deal with the lining. Now this one is a little bit more awkward because you're kind of twisting everything together in order to make it happen, but it's still the same process. We're going to pin the top of the shoulder strap together, except this time it's the lining side, stitch across, and then we're ready to close that up by hand. All right, so now when we pull that, you can see that everything already just wants to kind of go in because I pre-pressed that. And I just have to pin these guys together and stitch them shut by hand. I'm making sure to line up those seams allowances, so that way our bag is going to be hitting at the same spot for both the lining and the upper. All right, so I can see right here is where my edge is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle that I've threaded up, and I'm going to poke it through one of those seam lines where it's already sewn together. That way I can hide my knot on the inside of that section. Then what I like to do is just take a little bit from each side, running my needle through and pull it out. And this part's already stitched through by the machine, but I like to just get started a little bit beforehand. And when you're all done, you really can't see this stitch. Works out pretty well. I may be taking a 1/16 of an inch on each side. Just making sure I'm catching both sides right on that fold. When you get to the edge, I like to do a little quilter's knot on the needle. So what you're going to do is you're going to wrap your thread around 3 or 4 times. And then you're going to sort of pinch those wraps on the needle. And you're going to pull your thread through, making sure you've got those wraps pinched. And then it creates a tiny little knot. And then you can put your needle in through that fold again, bring it out maybe an inch or so over. And then if we're real quiet, we can hear a pop. I don't know if you could heard it this time, but that knot is now buried in, and we'll go ahead and snip the thread, and we are good to start going on the other side. I want to show you guys that when you master that stitch, it really is very invisible. I used white thread on here, and you can barely even see it. You have to look really, really close, and we shoot this in 4K high definition, so it is really, really invisible. All right, so we are in the home stretch of the bag portion of this video, and then we just had to make our carrying case. This part here is pretty simple because we've done all the hard work of getting our pieces sewn together and our straps sewn up. What we're going to do is we're going to take the top halves and we're going to place them right sides together. And we're going to match those seams. So our seams here should be going in opposite directions. I'm going to start with this bottom seam. That's the one that's going to be the most obvious if it's off. So I want to make sure that those seams are nested and that I pinned right in there. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with my pleats. We want those to be matching, and I like my pleats to be going in opposite directions as well. I do kind of like them to go in the same way though. So since the bottom pleat here is going toward the center, I want the bottom pleat on the other side also to be going toward the center when I put this together. And then the front side, which is this side, is pointing out. Now this is a little bit too much space for me to just leave open, so I'm going to throw some pins in there too. All right, our next really big spot that needs to be correct is where the bag meets the lining. And what you want to do is have it so that these seams are going toward the lining. So we want them pointing this way. That way when the bag is all pointing correctly, it's just like going to be going down like with gravity. So I'm making sure that that is nice and in alignment. That is an area where if you are off, it's going to be obvious. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side and go ahead and pin along here. All right, now we need to get our linings together. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of tuck these handles out of the way because we don't want to mess with those just yet. Those will just be done and ready to go when we're all done. All right, so we've already pinned at our joins where the lining meets the outside. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with pinning those pleats again. Now, if you've ever made a bag before, then this next part may be familiar with you, but if you haven't, be sure to pay attention. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch all the way around the outside of this, but we're going to leave an opening at the bottom of the lining so that we can put our hand through to turn everything right side out. So you really just want 4 or 5 inches, just enough for you to grab your hand and kind of pull stuff out in when it's a fist, because you need to be grabbing a hold of fabric. But I do want to make sure that I'm lining up my middles. So I'm just using the marks from where the fabric was folded for that. And then I'm also going to put marks or pins. So that way I'm going to have about that 4 or 5 inches. And this is going to be like my stop point. So like we had those marks when we were doing our straps. I'm going to start here, stitch all the way around the bag, and stop here and leave this entire section between the pins open. And I do reinforce my stitches by back stitching at the start and stop. That way when I'm pulling everything through, if I get a little too excited or a little aggressive with it, we're not going to rip some seams open. Then we're just going to finish this up by hand, just like we did with our handles. All right, so now we've got our opening that we left for turning. I'm just going to go ahead and reach in all the way to the other side of the bag, flip it so the right sides are out. Now before I get too excited and stuff everything back in, it's a good idea to go ahead and just stitch this opening closed. What I like to do is just put my fingers in and then just kind of pull, and you can see that that just wants to turn in. Then you can just pinch that closed with your fingers and put some pins in it to hold it in place while you hand stitch it shut. All right, now is the point where it actually is going to look like a bag. We're going to stuff that lining inside. All right, now all that's left to do is to give it a really good press around the outside, and you have a fabulous bag. It's got a great pocket. We fussy cut that to make it match with the piece below. Great way to show off some fabrics and have a bunch to go with. But we're missing one thing, and that is a sack to hold it in. So we're gonna make that little case next, so that way we can fold this up and put it inside. The very first thing we're going to do for our case is to get our center tie ready. So you're gonna fold it hot dog style so that your edges are meeting, so that we can get a center crease. And that's gonna give us our line so we can put our raw edges to the center. Now you're going to unfold it, and we can see that nice line where everything was folded to center. And you're going to fold your raw edge to meet that line, and you're going to press it in. And you're going to do this one side at a time, working your way down. Now for the second part, I'll meet it to the center, but what I try to do is actually line up my edges so that they're nice and even with the edge that I already folded in. That way it looks nice and straight no matter what's going on. All right, we've got all our raw edges tucked in along the length of it, but we also need to work on our ends. So what you're gonna do for that is you're just going to unfold it, and you're going to press it in and give that just a little press. This doesn't have to be any specific length, just enough to make it work. And then I would fold it back in again and give it one more press with everything turned under, and do that for both sides. Now this might not be staying perfectly folded in for you. Don't panic. We're going to stitch down this folded side here as close as we can, all the way down, and that is going to make our tie and keep all those raw edges enclosed so we can use it again and again and again. All right, I'm just stitching as close to that edge as I can, trying to keep it nice and even as I go, and also making sure everything stays turned in. All right, we're going to take our strap, we're going to put it to the side for a second, and we're going to take our clover looking plus things that will become the case, and we're going to layer those so that we have right sides together. Now I'm going to pin first at all of my 4 corners. I really want those to be exact because we're going to pivot very sharply at them in order to make this work and have nice sharp corners. Next, I'm going to line up the tips of all of my plus signs, and I'm going to pin at the top and at the sides. Now, just like when we left an opening for turning with the lining, we want to do the same thing here. So I'm just going to leave a 3-inch opening along one of the straight edges. So I'm just going to start here and turn the corner, and then I'll stop just a little bit beyond where that pin is. I don't want to leave the corner open. I want to make sure I've got at least a 1/2 inch before that, because that is an area that's going to be high stress, and so we don't want that to be hand sewn. We want that with the machine. Always make sure you are reinforcing your stitches when you're starting and stopping, when you're leaving a hole for hand turning. One last thing you'll want to do before you start sewing is lay your template on top of your piece, and we're going to mark this red dot on our piece. So that way we know exactly where it is that we're supposed to turn. So just pull that back and then just make a nice big mark. I'm making a nice big pink dot for myself. That way I know when I sew here, I'm going to sew till I hit my needle in the pink dot. Then I can turn the whole thing and go to the next side. So make sure you mark all 4 of your corners. All right, so I'm sewing right until that needle is on that dot. And then I'm going to lift it up and turn everything 90 degrees and then keep on going around the curves. All right, I've turned the last curve and I've gotten to where I started. So I'm going to go ahead and back stitch a little bit and stop so I've got room for turning. All right, now we've got to do a couple of things to this before we turn it right side out so that it lays nice and flat. The first thing you want to do is take your shears and cut right up to, but not beyond, the stitching line of your corners. This is going to allow it to have a nice sharp point, but if you go too far, then you're going to have a hole. All right, now the pattern tells you to use pinking shears to go all the way around these corners. Don't panic if you don't have pinking shears. What we're going to do is we're going to cut little V's out of everything. You also can get pinking blades for your rotary cutter if it's something that you want to look into. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cut in at an angle, and we're going to cut right up to that seam, but again, not going beyond it. And you're going to want to just keep doing that at close intervals all the way around, and you will end up with a nice smooth curve when you flip it around. Just takes a little bit longer. All right, now we're going to take and turn everything right side out. I'm going to give this whole thing a little spray. I don't like to use steam in my iron, so this is what I do instead. That way it'll be a little easier to press down. So just like when we were doing the straps, I like to have what's going to be the outside on top. That way if there's a roll, it's going to be on the inside and you won't see it as much. So this is where you want to pay real nice attention to make sure that your curves are as curvy as they can be. Because once we do this and we stitch it down, there's going to be no going back. Same with the points. We want those nice and pointy. I just kind of use my fingertips to push out that seam as much as possible. Just kind of dig at it with my fingernails and push out. Now here's our opening. I'm going to go ahead and press that nice and flat. And this one I'm not going to hand stitch because we are going to top stitch around it. So that's good enough for me, but you could always do both. I'm going to go ahead and move my sewing machine back to that 1/4 inch stitch and increase my stitch length to about a 3.0 for top stitching. When you get to that corner, make sure you're turning and going around. All right, we're going to take our template one more time so that way we can mark our center. I'm just going to fold that back until I hit my center mark and just go ahead and make a mark so I know where to lay my tie. Then I'm just going to fold my tie in half to find my center. Got it right there. And we're going to lay the center right on top of that mark that I made, and we're going to put a little pin there. All right, now we're just going to stitch a little box going right around here so that way we can stitch down our stitching lines and we are good to go on our case. All right, I've made it around one time, but whenever I'm doing stuff like this that really's got to stay tight, I'd like to go around 2 or 3 times. All right, there's a special way to fold these so that it fits in the case. So the first thing you're going to do is you're just going to fold it in half. Then we're going to fold it in half again lengthwise. we're going to fold our strap in. Now we're going to grab our case and we're going to put it in the center, and we're able to just fold in first our outer layers. And you can just fit it right in the center there. Then we can wrap around again, and give it a cute little tie. Isn't that cute? And it's so easy to store. You can just store it in your bag. So if you're going to go shopping later, you don't have to use a plastic bag. You can just bring this with you, pull it out, fit a ton in. You've got a little pocket. You can fit up to 2 of the bags in here. So it is really nice and cozy, and they look cute. So that's fun. I think these are really giftable. Make sure that you are connected with your SIY retailer, because these kits are coming out at different times of the year. So make sure you're connected with them to know when your favorite is coming out. But you can make them in all manner of fabrics. And of course, we recommend that you get your fabric from a Jaftex company, because they are the ones who are sponsoring this and coming up with the fabulous projects for you. And that is FreeSpirit, Henry Glass, Studio E, and Blank. Thank you so much for following along with this tutorial. I hope you've learned tons, and I hope you are inspired to make a whole bunch of these. I think they would make great gifts. Farmers market season will be here before we know it. So these would be great to take with to that, because they're so nice and portable, and they really hold a ton. I mean, look at the size of this bag. It really just holds so much, and those straps are really nice and easy. And then of course you've got your pocket, so you can put whatever you need inside of it. You can throw your little extras on the outside, but it would just be really nice to just, you know, throw over your shoulder, head to the farmer's market, get whatever fruits and veggies you can find, maybe some fresh bread, and bring it home with you.